The sound of tearing fabric cut through the Golden Swan restaurant like a scream. Margaret Whitfield stood there, her diamond-covered fingers still gripping the torn dress of the young black waitress. Jasmine Washington, 23 years old, held the shredded uniform against her body, tears streaming down her face as champagne dripped onto the marble floor. "This is what you people deserve." Margaret's voice was pure venom. The 100 elegant diners sat frozen, forks suspended in midair, watching in horror. But what Margaret didn't know, what made her blood turn to ice when she heard the voice, was that her millionaire husband had been watching everything. Margaret. Richard Whitfield's single word fell like thunder. She spun around to find him standing in the entrance, roses dropping from his hands, his face a mask of disgust at the monster wearing his wife's face. In that moment, as Jasmine's tears mixed with spilled champagne on the pristine floor, everyone knew they were witnessing the exact second a 23-year marriage died. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. The crystal champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, sending fragments across the exclusive restaurant's pristine tiles. Margaret Whitfield stood frozen, her manicured fingers still extended in the air where she'd knocked the glass from the young waitress's tray. But that wasn't enough. Not for Margaret. Not today. "You stupid, clumsy girl." Margaret's voice cut through the elegant dining room like a blade, causing every head to turn. The waitress, a young black woman named Jasmine, stood trembling, champagne dripping from her uniform onto her worn shoes. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, but you—" Jasmine began, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't you dare blame me." Margaret's face flushed crimson, her diamonds catching the chandelier light as she gestured wildly. "This is what happens when they hire people like you in places like this." The words hung in the air like poison. The entire restaurant fell silent. Even the soft classical music seemed to pause in horror. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained her composure. She'd been working at the Golden Swan for 3 months now, saving every penny for her mother's medical bills. This job was everything to her. "Please, Mrs. Whitfield, let me clean this up and bring you another." But Margaret wasn't finished. She grabbed the fabric of Jasmine's dress uniform at the shoulder, her rings catching the delicate material. "This cheap uniform suits you perfectly. Just like everything else about you, cheap and replaceable." With a vicious pull, Margaret tore the sleeve of Jasmine's dress, the ripping sound echoing through the stunned restaurant. The fabric split down to Jasmine's elbow, exposing her arm. Several guests gasped. A woman covered her child's eyes. An elderly man stood up as if to intervene, but was held back by his wife. Jasmine stood there, humiliated, holding the torn fabric against her body, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Please, Mrs. Whitfield, I need this job. My mother is sick, Your problems are not my concern." Margaret spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "You people always have some sob story, don't you? Always looking for sympathy, for handouts." Richard Whitfield had chosen that exact moment to walk into the Golden Swan. He'd finished his business meeting early and decided to surprise his wife for their anniversary lunch. 23 years of marriage. He'd even stopped to pick up roses from the florist down the street, her favorite pink heritage roses that cost a fortune but always made her smile. But as he stood in the entrance, hidden partially behind a large potted palm, the roses fell from his hands. He watched in absolute horror as his wife, the woman he'd loved for over 2 decades, the mother of his children, the person he'd built an empire alongside, revealed a side of herself he'd never seen. Or perhaps he realized with a sickening feeling, a side he'd chosen never to see. The restaurant manager, Philippe, rushed over, his face pale with panic. "Mrs. Whitfield, please, I must insist." "You must insist on nothing." Margaret turned on him, her fury redirected. "Do you know who I am? Do you know how much money my husband and I spend in this establishment? I could buy this place tomorrow if I wanted to." Philippe wrung his hands, caught between his wealthy patron and his young employee. Jasmine stood silent now, her dignity the only thing keeping her upright. She wouldn't give Margaret the satisfaction of seeing her completely broken. Richard remained frozen in place, watching everything unfold. His mind raced back through years of small moments he'd dismissed, comments Margaret had made about those people in their neighborhood, her insistence that their children attend certain schools to avoid bad influences, the way she'd reacted when their daughter had brought home a black friend from college. "Get her out of here," Margaret commanded Philippe. "I want her fired immediately, and if I ever see her in this restaurant again or anywhere in this city where respectable people gather, I'll make sure she never works anywhere decent again. My husband owns half the businesses in this town." That's when Richard started walking forward, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the marble floor. But before anyone noticed him, Jasmine spoke up, her voice stronger now despite her tears. "I feel sorry for you, Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine said quietly but clearly. "I may not have your money or your designer clothes, but I have something you'll never have. Dignity and a heart that knows how to love instead of hate." Margaret's hand flew up, and for a moment it seemed she might strike the young woman. Several guests stood up in alarm. "How dare you speak to me like that, you little—" "Margaret!" The single word froze the entire restaurant. Richard's voice, usually warm and jovial, was cold as Arctic ice. Margaret spun around, her face transforming from rage to surprise in an instant. "Richard, darling, this girl, she spilled champagne all over me and then had the audacity to—" "I saw everything, Margaret." His words were measured, controlled, but everyone could hear the tremor of rage beneath them. Every single thing. The color drained from Margaret's face. She tried to laugh, a brittle, nervous sound. "Well, then you saw how incompetent she was. Really, darling, the service here has declined terribly. We should speak to the owner about their hiring practices." "The owner is standing right here," Richard said, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. "I bought this restaurant 6 months ago. It was supposed to be a surprise for our anniversary. Jasmine has been one of our best employees. Philippe sends me weekly reports." The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her eyes darted around the room, suddenly aware of all the phones that had been discreetly recording, all the witnesses to her behavior. Richard, you don't understand. She was rude to me last week, and I was just—" "Last week, you were in Paris with your sister," Richard said flatly. "Don't add lies to what I've just witnessed." He turned to Jasmine, his expression softening. "Miss Washington, I am deeply, profoundly sorry for what you've endured today. This is not who we are." He paused, glancing at his wife. "This is not who I am, and this is not what the Golden Swan represents." Jasmine stood straighter, still holding her torn uniform together. "Mr. Whitfield, please go to the staff room and change. Take the rest of the day off, paid of course. Tomorrow, if you're willing to return, I'd like to discuss a significant promotion. The Golden Swan needs a new assistant manager, someone who can maintain grace and dignity even in the most trying circumstances. You've just proven you're more than qualified." Tears flowed down Jasmine's face again, but these were different tears. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Philippe, please escort Miss Washington and ensure she has everything she needs. And call Antoine from our flagship store. Have him bring a selection of uniforms for Miss Washington to choose from for her new position." As Jasmine was led away, supported by a visibly relieved Philippe, Richard turned back to his wife. The entire restaurant watched, transfixed by the drama unfolding before them. "Richard, please," Margaret whispered, reaching for his arm. "You're embarrassing me in front of all these people." He pulled away from her touch as if burned. "I'm embarrassing you? You just revealed yourself to be someone I don't recognize, someone I'm ashamed to call my wife. It's just a waitress, for God's sake. Why are you making such a big deal about this?" "Just a waitress?" Richard's voice rose for the first time. "She's a human being, Margaret, a young woman working hard to take care of her sick mother. And you tore her dress, humiliated her, threatened her livelihood. And why? Because of the color of her skin? That's not—" "I never said—" "You said exactly what you meant, and everyone here heard it, everyone recorded it." He pulled out his phone, showing her that he too had been recording from the moment he'd realized what was happening. "Including me." Margaret's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fear that crept across her features. Around them, the restaurant patrons had given up any pretense of not watching. Some had their phones out, still recording. Others whispered among themselves, and Margaret could hear fragments of their conversations. Disgraceful. I always wondered about her. Poor girl. About time someone stood up to her. Richard, please, let's discuss this at home, Margaret pleaded, her voice dropping to a whisper. Not here, not in front of everyone. Like you cared about an audience when you were humiliating that young woman? Richard's jaw was set, his eyes hard as granite. No, Margaret. You chose to make a public spectacle. Now you can face the public consequences. From across the restaurant, an elderly black gentleman stood up slowly, leaning on his walking cane. He was dressed impeccably in a three-piece suit, his silver hair dignified and well-groomed. The room seemed to hold its breath as he approached. Excuse me, Mr. Whitfield, the man said, his voice deep and resonant despite his age. My name is James Patterson, Dr. James Patterson. I couldn't help but witness what just transpired. Richard turned to him, extending his hand. Dr. Patterson, I apologize that you had to see this. On the contrary, Dr. Patterson said, shaking Richard's hand firmly. I'm glad I was here. You see, I've been coming to this restaurant for 15 years, long before you owned it, and I've had the pleasure of being served by Miss Washington several times. She's unfailingly professional, kind, and gracious, even when dealing with difficult customers. He turned to look at Margaret, who seemed to shrink under his steady gaze. I've also had the misfortune of observing Mrs. Whitfield's behavior on previous occasions. This is not the first time she's been unkind to the staff, though today was certainly the most egregious display. That's a lie, Margaret burst out. I've never seen this man before in my life. Dr. Patterson smiled sadly. 3 weeks ago, you complained that your soup was cold and demanded that the young Latino busboy be fired because he looked suspicious near your purse. 2 months before that, you insisted that the hostess seat you at a different table because you didn't want to sit near a family with children who you said looked unruly, though I noticed the only difference between them and other families was their race. Richard's face had gone pale. Is this true? Your wife is well known among the staff here, Mr. Whitfield, Philippe interjected nervously. We've had several complaints, but given your family's standing... You never told me, Richard said, his voice hollow. Would you have believed them over me? Margaret shot back, desperation creeping into her tone. Your own wife? I would have investigated. I would have asked questions. I would have... Richard paused, running his hand through his hair. My God, Margaret. Who are you? Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. If I may, Mr. Whitfield, there's something else you should know. I'm on the board of directors at St. Mary's Hospital. Jasmine's mother, Gloria Washington, is one of my patients. She has stage 3 kidney disease and requires dialysis 3 times a week. Jasmine has been working multiple jobs to pay for her mother's treatment and to save for a kidney transplant. The information hit Richard like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, gripping the back of a nearby chair for support. Dr. Patterson continued, That young woman your wife just assaulted and humiliated has been sleeping 4 hours a night for the past year, working here during the day and cleaning offices at night. She's also taking online classes to become a registered nurse so she can better care for her mother. She's 23 years old and carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders with more grace than most people could muster. Stop it, Margaret snapped. Stop trying to make me feel guilty with sob stories. So she has a hard life. So what? We all have problems. What problems do you have, Margaret? Richard asked quietly. What struggles have you faced? We live in a $12 million mansion. You drive a car that costs more than most people's homes. You've never worked a day in your life since we married. You have a housekeeper, a personal chef, a driver. What exactly are your problems? I've raised our children. With the help of 3 nannies, Richard countered. And our children? God, what have we taught them? What have you taught them when I wasn't looking? As if summoned by his words, the restaurant door opened again, and a young woman rushed in. She was in her early 20s with Richard's dark hair and Margaret's delicate features. She looked frantic, her phone clutched in her hand. "Mom, Dad." Emma Whitfield ran toward them, her face flushed with panic. "It's all over social media. Everyone's sharing the video. My friends are texting me asking if it's really Mom and I... She stopped short, seeing her father's expression, her mother's tears, and the restaurant full of watching eyes. "Oh God, it's true, isn't it?" "Emma, darling." Margaret reached for her daughter, but Emma stepped back, her face a mask of horror and disgust. "I saw the video, Mom. My roommate Keisha sent it to me." "Keisha, who you said I shouldn't room with because she would hold me back." "Keisha, who's been my best friend since freshman year, who you barely tolerate when she comes to visit." Emma's voice cracked. "Is this who you really are? Is this who you've always been?" "Emma, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Emma's voice rose to match her mother's earlier volume. "I understand why you made those comments about Marcus when I was dating him. I understand why you were so relieved when we broke up. I understand why you always steered me towards certain friends and away from others." Richard moved toward his daughter, and she fell into his arms, sobbing. "Daddy, how could she? How could Mom be this person?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Richard said, holding his daughter tight. "I honestly don't know." Margaret stood isolated, looking around the restaurant at the sea of condemning faces. Her perfect world was crumbling around her, and she couldn't comprehend how quickly it had happened. In her mind, she'd done nothing wrong. She'd simply put a servant in her place. Why was everyone acting like she'd committed murder? "This is ridiculous," she declared, trying to regain some semblance of control. "You're all overreacting, so I was a bit harsh with the help." "The help?" Emma pulled away from her father, whirling to face her mother. "Her name is Jasmine. She's a person, Mom. A person with a sick mother and dreams and dignity. How can you not see that? Emma, you're young. You don't understand how the world really works. No, Mom, you don't understand how the world is supposed to work. How it should work. How Dad and I want it to work." Emma took a deep breath, seeming to age years in that moment. "I'm ashamed of you. I'm ashamed to be your daughter right now." The words hit Margaret like a slap. She reached out desperately for her daughter, but Emma backed away, moving closer to her father. Dr. Patterson, who had been standing quietly, spoke up again. "Mr. Whitfield, I believe Miss Washington is still in the staff room. Perhaps it would be appropriate for you and your daughter to apologize to her personally. And Mrs. Whitfield, I suggest you take this time to reflect on your actions." Richard nodded gratefully to the doctor. "Emma, would you come with me?" "Yes, Dad." Emma wiped her tears, straightening her shoulders. "I want to apologize to her, and I want to know if there's anything we can do to help with her mother's treatment." As father and daughter started to walk toward the staff area, Margaret called out desperately, "Richard, you can't just leave me here." Richard stopped, turning back to look at the woman he'd married 23 years ago. "Actually, Margaret, I can, and I am. You need to find your own way home, and when you get there, you'll find your things being packed. I want you out of my house by tonight." The restaurant gasped collectively. Margaret's legs seemed to give out, and she collapsed into a chair, her perfectly styled hair falling across her face. You can't divorce me over this, over a waitress." "It's not about the waitress, Margaret. It's about discovering that I've been married to someone capable of such cruelty, such prejudice, such hatred. And what's worse is realizing that this probably isn't new. I've just been too blind or too willing to ignore it." 23 years, Richard. You're throwing away 23 years. "No, Margaret, you threw it away the moment you revealed your true character. I'm just acknowledging what's already been destroyed." The staff room of the Golden Swan was small but comfortable, with lockers lining one wall and a worn leather couch against another. Jasmine sat there, having changed into a spare uniform that Philippe had found, her torn dress folded neatly beside her. She was on the phone, her voice soft and reassuring. "No, Mama, I'm fine, really. Just a little incident with a customer, but Mr. Whitfield handled it. I'll be home after my shift." "Yes, Mama, I took your medication from the pharmacy this morning. It's on the kitchen counter. I love you too." She ended the call just as there was a gentle knock on the door. Richard and Emma stood in the doorway, both looking emotionally drained, but determined. "Miss Washington, Jasmine, may we come in?" Richard asked. Jasmine stood quickly, smoothing down her replacement uniform. "Mr. Whitfield, of course, but you didn't have to." "Yes, we did," Emma interrupted, stepping forward. "Miss Washington, I'm Emma Whitfield. I'm so sorry for what my mother did to you. There's no excuse for it, and I'm mortified and ashamed." Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise at the young woman's sincerity. They were roughly the same age, she realized, though their lives couldn't have been more different. "You don't need to apologize for your mother's actions," Jasmine said gently. "You're not responsible for what she did." "Maybe not directly," Emma said, tears flowing again. "But I benefited from her prejudices my whole life without realizing it. Or maybe I did realize it sometimes and just chose to ignore it because it was easier." She took a shuddering breath. "My ex-boyfriend Marcus was black. Mom never said anything overtly racist, but there were always these little comments, these subtle discouragements, and I let them influence me. I let her poison get into my head, and I ended something beautiful because of it." Richard placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, then turned to Jasmine. "Dr. Patterson told us about your mother's condition, about the kidney disease." Jasmine stiffened slightly. "I don't want charity, Mr. Whitfield. I just want to work and earn my way." "It's not charity," Richard interrupted gently. "It's healthcare. Every employee at my companies has comprehensive health insurance that covers family members. Somehow that wasn't extended to the restaurant staff here. That's my oversight, and it's being corrected immediately. Your mother's treatment will be covered, including the transplant when a donor is found." Jasmine's legs gave out and she sank back onto the couch, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. You don't understand. We've been struggling for so long. Mama keeps saying she's ready to go, that she doesn't want to be a burden. I've been so scared that I'll lose her before I can save enough." Emma sat beside her, tentatively putting an arm around the other woman's shoulders. "You won't lose her. We'll make sure of it." "There's more," Richard said, pulling up a chair to sit at their eye level. "The assistant manager position I mentioned, it comes with a substantial salary increase, enough that you can cut back to just one job and focus on your studies. Dr. Patterson mentioned you're studying to be a nurse." Jasmine nodded, wiping her eyes. "Online classes. I'm about halfway through the program, but it's been slow going with work and taking care of Mama. We have a scholarship program through the Whitfield Foundation," Richard continued. "Full tuition, books, and a living stipend for nursing students. You'd be a perfect candidate." "Mr. Whitfield, this is too much." "No, it's not nearly enough to make up for what happened today, or for what's apparently been happening for who knows how long." Richard's face darkened. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Has my wife done anything like this before? To you or other staff?" Jasmine hesitated, looking between father and daughter. Emma squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Please tell us the truth. We need to know." She's never been physical before," Jasmine said carefully. "But there have been comments, requests not to be served by certain staff members, complaints that seemed to be more about who we were than what we did." Richard's jaw tightened. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Would you have believed us?" Jasmine asked quietly. "A waitress's word against your wife's?" The question hung in the air, heavy with truth. Richard knew the answer. He probably wouldn't have. He would have assumed there was a misunderstanding, given Margaret the benefit of the doubt, maybe had a gentle word with her about being kinder to the staff. But he wouldn't have seen the pattern, wouldn't have recognized the deep-seated prejudice. "I'm going to review every complaint, every termination, every resignation from the past 5 years at all my properties," Richard said firmly. "If anyone was unfairly treated or dismissed due to my wife's influence, they'll be offered their jobs back with full back pay and an apology." Before anyone could respond, Philippe appeared in the doorway, looking flustered. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation. Mrs. Whitfield is, well, she's refusing to leave." She's at the bar and she's had several drinks and she's saying things, making accusations. Richard stood up wearily. What kind of accusations? She's telling anyone who will listen that you're having an affair with Miss Washington, that this whole scene was staged to get rid of her so you could be with your mistress. Philippe looked mortified, having to repeat the words. Emma jumped up, furious. That's disgusting. How dare she? It's okay, Jasmine said quietly. People will believe what they want to believe. No, it's not okay, Richard said firmly. Excuse me, ladies. I need to handle this once and for all. He strode back into the main dining room where Margaret was indeed at the bar, a martini in hand, holding court with several uncomfortable-looking patrons who were clearly trying to edge away from her. Married 23 years, and he throws it all away for some young thing, Margaret was saying, her words slightly slurred. You know how men are when they hit their 50s, midlife crisis. They see a pretty young face and suddenly their wives aren't good enough. That's enough, Margaret. The restaurant, which had started to return to normal, fell silent again. Richard stood there, his presence commanding attention. Margaret turned on her bar stool, nearly losing her balance. Oh, look who's back. Done comforting your little girlfriend? The only person who's destroyed our marriage is you, Margaret. Your hatred, your prejudice, your cruelty, that's what ended us, not some fictional affair. Please, you expect people to believe you're throwing away our marriage over principles, over some moral stand? She laughed bitterly. Men don't leave their wives over principles, they leave them for younger women. I'm leaving you because I can't stand to look at you anymore, Richard said, his voice carrying across the room. Because when I look at you now, all I see is that ugly hatred. All I hear are those cruel words. All I can think about is how many people you've hurt while I wasn't paying attention. Mr. Whitfield? Everyone turned to see a middle-aged black woman standing in the restaurant entrance. She was thin, frail-looking, connected to a portable oxygen tank. But her eyes were bright and determined. Mama! Jasmine rushed from the staff room, Emma and Philippe following. What are you doing here? You should be resting. I saw the video, Gloria Washington said, her voice wheezy but clear. My neighbor showed me. I had to come. She looked at Margaret, who was staring at her with a mixture of confusion and disdain. You're the woman who hurt my baby girl. I didn't hurt anyone, Margaret protested. It was just a little tear in her dress. You tore more than her dress, Gloria said, moving closer with Jasmine supporting her. You tried to tear her dignity, her spirit, her hope, but you failed. You know why? Because my daughter is stronger than your hatred will ever be. She turned to Richard. You must be Mr. Whitfield. Thank you for standing up for my daughter. Mrs. Washington, you shouldn't have come out in your condition, Richard began, concerned. I've been fighting this disease for 3 years, Mr. Whitfield. I've got fight left in me yet, especially when it comes to my child. She looked back at Margaret. You think you're better than us because of your money, your skin color, your fancy clothes? Let me tell you something. I worked 40 years as a pediatric nurse. I saved more lives than I can count. I raised 3 children on my own after my husband died in Afghanistan serving this country. My daughter is working herself to the bone to save my life while getting an education to help others. What have you done with your life besides spend your husband's money and spread misery? Margaret's face flushed red. How dare you speak to me like that? The same way you dared to speak to my daughter like she was less than human, Gloria shot back. The difference is I'm speaking truth, you were speaking hatred. The room was transfixed by the confrontation between the 2 women, one standing tall despite her illness, the other swaying on her bar stool despite her wealth. You know what the saddest part is? Gloria continued. You had everything, a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, wealth, health, privilege, and you poisoned it all with your ugly heart. My daughter and I may not have much money, but we have love, respect, dignity, and each other. We're richer than you'll ever be. Margaret suddenly lunged off her bar stool. Whether to attack or just leave, no one could tell. But her heel caught on the stool's footrest, and she went down hard, her designer dress riding up, her carefully styled hair flying in all directions. The martini glass shattered on the floor beside her. For a moment, no one moved. Then Gloria Washington did something unexpected. She reached out her hand to help Margaret up. Margaret stared at the offered hand in shock. Here was this woman, sick, frail, whom she had indirectly insulted and whose daughter she had humiliated, offering her help. "Take my hand," Gloria said simply. "That's what decent people do. They help each other up when they fall." Margaret's eyes filled with tears for the first time. Real tears, not the manipulative ones she'd tried earlier. But her pride won out. She slapped Gloria's hand away and struggled to her feet on her own. "I don't need help from you people," she spat, though the words lacked her earlier venom. They sounded hollow now, empty. "Mom!" Emma cried out, appalled. "Even now? Even after everything?" Margaret looked at her daughter, at her husband, at the room full of condemning faces. Something flickered in her eyes, perhaps the tiniest beginning of realization of what she'd lost. But it was quickly replaced by defiance. "I'm leaving," Margaret announced, grabbing her purse from the bar. "And when I get the best divorce lawyer in the state, we'll see who ends up with nothing, Richard." She started toward the door, but her path was blocked by someone new, a well-dressed elderly white woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. She was using an elegant walking stick and wore a strand of pearls that looked like they cost more than most people's annual salary. "Hello, Margaret," the woman said coolly. Margaret stopped dead in her tracks. "Mother?" The restaurant collectively held its breath. Eleanor Pemberton, Margaret's mother, was a legend in their social circles. Old money, old values, and an old-fashioned sense of propriety that could cut like a knife. "I received several calls about a disturbing video," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from decades of being listened to. "I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it couldn't possibly be my daughter behaving like common trash. But here we are." "Mother, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. I saw the video, Margaret, the whole thing, including the part where you tore that young woman's dress like some kind of savage." Margaret's face went white. "You saw?" "Everyone saw, my dear. It's already been shared thousands of times. The country club is buzzing. The charity board is calling an emergency meeting to discuss removing you. The publishers of the society pages are having a field day." Eleanor moved closer, her stick tapping ominously on the marble floor. "You've humiliated yourself, your family, and most importantly, me. Mother, Do you know who that young woman is, Margaret?" Eleanor interrupted, gesturing toward Jasmine with her stick. "She's a waitress. She's Gloria Washington's daughter. Gloria Washington, who was my private nurse for 6 months when I had my hip replacement 5 years ago." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "The same Gloria Washington who sat with me through long nights of pain, who kept me company when I was frightened, who treated me with more kindness and respect than my own daughter has shown me in years." Everyone turned to look at Gloria, who seemed surprised by this revelation. "Mrs. Pemberton," Gloria said softly, "I didn't know Margaret was your daughter. She has a different last name, and you never mentioned—" "I stopped mentioning Margaret in polite company years ago," Eleanor said curtly. "Every time I did, I had to endure another story about her latest embarrassment. The scene at the country club when she demanded the kitchen staff be replaced. The incident at the charity gala when she accused the coat check girl of stealing her wrap, only to find it in her car later. And now this." "Those were misunderstandings," Margaret protested. "They were patterns," Eleanor corrected. "Patterns I ignored for too long, hoping you'd grow out of them. But you're 47 years old, Margaret. If you haven't developed basic human decency by now, you never will." Richard stepped forward. "Mrs. Pemberton, I had no idea about these other incidents." "Of course you didn't, Richard." Margaret learned early how to hide her worst impulses from the people who mattered. She showed you what you wanted to see, a perfect society wife. But the help, the service workers, anyone she deemed beneath her, they saw the real Margaret. "That's not true," Margaret cried. "I'm your daughter. How can you take their side?" "Because their side is the side of human decency," Eleanor replied, "and because I have my own confession to make." The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. Eleanor turned to address everyone present, her voice carrying clearly. 53 years ago, I was much like my daughter is now. Raised in privilege, taught that we were better than others, that certain people were meant to serve while we were meant to be served. I believed it all, lived it all, until the day I met someone who changed my life. She paused, looking directly at Gloria and Jasmine. I was 24, newly married, pregnant with Margaret. I was shopping at Bergdorf's when I went into early labor. The only person who stopped to help me wasn't any of the wealthy women I knew, but a young black woman who was there delivering alterations. She stayed with me, helped me to the hospital, and held my hand until my husband arrived. She saved my life, and Margaret's life that day. The doctors said if I'd delivered alone, we both might have died. Margaret stared at her mother, this story clearly new to her. That woman's name was Jasmine Washington. Your grandmother, young lady, Eleanor said, looking at Jasmine. She was Gloria's mother-in-law. The revelation rippled through the room. Gloria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Robert's mother? She never told us this story. She was a humble woman, Eleanor continued. I tried to reward her, to pay her, but she refused everything. She just said she did what any decent person would do. But she did accept my friendship, and for 10 years, until she passed, she was one of the best friends I ever had. She taught me that the measure of a person isn't in their bank account or their skin color, but in their character. Eleanor turned back to Margaret, her expression one of deep disappointment. I failed you somehow, Margaret. Despite everything Jasmine Washington taught me, despite trying to raise you better, you became everything I once was, and worse. At least I had the excuse of ignorance. You had every opportunity to know better. You were friends with a black woman? Margaret said, as if this was the most shocking part of the revelation. You never told me. I told you about my friend Jasmine many times. I just never felt the need to mention her race because it didn't matter. But apparently I should have. Maybe if you'd known, you wouldn't have turned out to be such a disappointment. The word disappointment from her mother's lips finally broke something in Margaret. She sank into a nearby chair, her designer dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared, her entire worldview shaken. I don't understand, she whispered. Everything I am, everything I became, was to make you proud. The perfect marriage, the perfect social standing, the perfect image. Perfect? Eleanor laughed bitterly. You call this perfect? You're about to be divorced, ostracized from society, and viral on the internet for all the wrong reasons. You've lost your husband, your daughter's respect, and now mine. What exactly is perfect about any of this? Emma moved closer to her grandmother, and Eleanor embraced her warmly. At least one good thing came from you, Margaret. Emma has her father's heart, thank God. Gran, Emma said softly. What should we do? Eleanor considered for a moment, then addressed Richard. The divorce is your business, Richard, and I won't interfere. But I will say this. Margaret is my daughter, and despite everything, I love her. But love doesn't mean enabling her behavior. She needs to face consequences. She turned to Jasmine and Gloria. Mrs. Washington, Miss Washington, on behalf of my family, I deeply apologize. There is no excuse for my daughter's behavior. If there's anything I can do to help with your medical situation, please let me know. I have connections at several hospitals and have served on the board of the Organ Donation Network for 20 years. Gloria, still leaning on her daughter, nodded graciously. Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton. Your friendship with my mother-in-law explains so much. She always spoke of a dear friend named Eleanor who changed her perspective on many things. She said you were proof that people could change, could grow beyond their upbringing. She was too kind, Eleanor said, tears forming in her eyes. She was the one who changed me. And now seeing you and your daughter, I see her spirit lives on. She looked at Margaret one more time. I'll be liquidating your trust fund, Margaret. The money will go to establishing a nursing scholarship in the name of Jasmine Washington, the original Jasmine. It's what she would have wanted. You can't do that, Margaret protested weakly. That's my inheritance. It was your inheritance, Eleanor corrected. Now it's going to actually do some good in the world. Consider it a lesson in consequences, albeit one that comes far too late. Dr. Patterson, who had been watching everything unfold, stepped forward. If I may interject, this has been quite overwhelming for everyone, especially Mrs. Washington, given her condition. Perhaps we should. He was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, their expressions serious. The larger of the 2, a black officer whose nameplate read Williams, spoke first. We're looking for Margaret Whitfield. We've received multiple complaints about an assault that took place here. Assault? Margaret stood up shakily. It was just a torn dress. This is ridiculous. Ma'am, we have video evidence of you grabbing and tearing an employee's clothing, which constitutes assault. We also have reports of hate speech and threats to someone's employment based on racial discrimination, which could constitute a hate crime. A hate crime? Richard stepped forward. Officers, surely that's Mr. Whitfield? Officer Williams interrupted respectfully. I understand this is your establishment and your wife, but the law is clear. Multiple witnesses have come forward, and the video evidence is compelling. We need Mrs. Whitfield to come with us for questioning. You're arresting me? Margaret's voice rose to a near shriek. This is insane. Richard, do something. Richard looked at his wife, disheveled, desperate, and finally facing real consequences for her actions. Officers, will Miss Washington need to press charges? The second officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, spoke up. Several witnesses have already filed complaints independently, Mr. Whitfield. But yes, Miss Washington's cooperation would be helpful. All eyes turned to Jasmine, who stood supporting her mother, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. Gloria whispered something in her daughter's ear, and Jasmine straightened her shoulders. I need to think about it, Jasmine said carefully. This has all happened so fast. That's understandable, Officer Williams said kindly. But Mrs. Whitfield still needs to come with us for questioning based on the complaints we've already received. Eleanor stepped forward, leaning heavily on her walking stick. Officers, I'm Eleanor Pemberton, Margaret's mother. I'll accompany my daughter to the station and ensure she has proper legal representation. Mother, you're going to help me? Margaret looked hopeful for the first time. I'm going to ensure you face this properly, Margaret. No running, no hiding, no using money to make it go away. It's time you learned that actions have consequences. As the police officers waited, Margaret looked around the restaurant one final time. Every face she saw reflected disappointment, disgust, or pity. There was no support, no understanding, no one taking her side. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was completely alone with the consequences of her actions. Mrs. Whitfield, Officer Williams said firmly but not unkindly, we need to go now. Margaret stood, her legs unsteady. As she passed Jasmine, she stopped. For a moment it seemed she might say something, an apology perhaps, or at least an acknowledgement. But the moment passed, and she walked on, her mother following with dignified disappointment. After they left, the restaurant remained silent for a long moment. Then Richard cleared his throat and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this distressing incident. Your meals today are complimentary, and I hope you'll give the Golden Swan another chance to serve you properly in the future. There was a smattering of applause, and slowly people began returning to their meals, though the conversation was subdued and clearly focused on what they'd witnessed. Richard turned to Jasmine and Gloria. Mrs. Washington, you must be exhausted. Please let me arrange for my driver to take you both home. That's kind of you, Mr. Whitfield, Gloria said, her breathing labored. I think I need to sit down for a moment first. Dr. Patterson immediately helped her to a chair, checking her pulse with professional efficiency. You've overexerted yourself, Gloria. Your O2 levels are lower than I'd like. As the doctor tended to Gloria, Emma approached Jasmine hesitantly. I know this is a lot to ask, but could we maybe talk sometime, when things are calmer? I'd really like to get to know you better. And maybe you could tell me about your grandmother, the original Jasmine. Jasmine studied the young woman for a moment, seeing genuine interest and perhaps the beginning of real change. I'd like that, she said softly. Your grandmother was right. My grandmother-in-law was an amazing woman. She had so many stories. Maybe, Emma said carefully, we could start writing some of those stories down, document them. I'm a journalism major, and I think people should know about the connections between our families, about how people can change, can be better. I think Grandma Jasmine would have liked that, Jasmine replied with the first genuine smile she'd shown all day. Richard's phone rang and he frowned at the screen. It's my lawyer, I should take this. He stepped away and they could hear fragments of his conversation. Yes, immediately. No, I don't care about the prenup. Full health care coverage for the family. Yes, the scholarship too. While Richard was on the phone, Philippe approached with a tablet in hand. Miss Washington, I'm sorry to bother you, but the reservation system is showing several VIP bookings for next week, and if you're going to be assistant manager, you should probably— She's not going to be assistant manager, Richard interrupted, returning from his call. Everyone looked at him in shock. Jasmine's face fell, thinking the offer had been withdrawn. Richard smiled. She's going to be general manager. Philippe, I'm promoting you to regional director for all 5 restaurants. You've earned it, and frankly, I need someone I trust overseeing everything while I restructure my life. Jasmine, the general manager position comes with a starting salary of $90,000, full benefits, and flexible hours to accommodate your nursing studies. Jasmine sat down hard, overwhelmed. Mr. Whitfield, I don't have the experience. You have something more valuable than experience, Richard said. You have character, grace under pressure, and the respect of the staff. Philippe will train you, and I have no doubt you'll excel. This is happening so fast, Gloria said weakly. This morning, we were worried about making rent, and now things are going to be different, Richard said firmly. For all of us. Over the next 2 hours, as the restaurant slowly emptied and Gloria was made comfortable in the manager's office with Dr. Patterson attending to her, the pieces of a new future began falling into place. Richard's lawyer arrived with paperwork, contracts for Jasmine's promotion, healthcare enrollment forms for Gloria, and scholarship applications for the newly established Jasmine Washington Memorial Fund. As Jasmine signed her employment contract with a shaking hand, Emma sat beside her grandmother Eleanor, who had returned from the police station alone. What happened with Mom? Emma asked quietly. Eleanor sighed heavily. She's been formally charged with assault and potential hate crime enhancements. She's being held overnight. Richard's lawyer refused to post bail immediately, said she needed to understand the seriousness of the situation. She'll be released tomorrow, pending trial. Will she go to prison? Probably not if she takes a plea deal. Community service, anger management classes, diversity training, the judge will likely mandate all of that. But the social consequences, those will be far worse for someone like Margaret. Eleanor shook her head sadly. She's already been removed from 3 charity boards. The country club is holding an emergency vote about her membership. The video has been viewed over 1 million times now. Gran, Emma said carefully, do you think she'll ever change? Really change? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. I did. It took someone extraordinary to open my eyes, but I changed. Your mother? I don't know. The first step to change is admitting you're wrong, and Margaret has never been good at that. Meanwhile, Richard was having a quiet conversation with Dr. Patterson. You mentioned Gloria needs a kidney transplant. What's her blood type? O negative, Dr. Patterson replied. It's one of the harder matches to find. She's been on the list for 2 years, but with her condition deteriorating. Richard pulled out his phone and made another call. Within minutes, he was connected to the chief of transplant surgery at the city's best hospital. The conversation was brief but promising. Gloria would be moved to the top of the evaluation list, and they would explore all options, including living donors. As the afternoon wore on and the restaurant prepared for the dinner service, Jasmine found herself in the surreal position of conducting her first staff meeting as general manager. The employees, many of whom had witnessed the earlier drama, were supportive and eager to work with her. I know today has been unusual, Jasmine began, her voice growing stronger with each word. But I want you all to know that The Golden Swan is going to be a place where every employee is valued, respected, and heard. We're going to build something special here, not just a restaurant, but a community." The staff applauded, and several came up to share their own stories of difficult customers and moments when they'd felt marginalized. Jasmine listened to each one, taking notes, making plans. 3 weeks later, the restaurant was bustling with its usual elegant crowd, but there was a different energy in the air. Jasmine, dressed in a sharp managerial suit that Emma had helped her pick out, moved confidently through the dining room, greeting guests and checking on staff. At a corner table, Richard sat with his daughter and Eleanor, reviewing plans for the Jasmine Washington Memorial Foundation. They'd already received dozens of applications from aspiring nurses, and Eleanor had convinced several of her wealthy friends to contribute. "The first scholarship recipient has been selected," Eleanor announced, reading from her tablet. "A young woman from the Bronx who's been working 3 jobs to pay for nursing school. She reminds me of someone," she said, glancing warmly at Jasmine as she passed. The door to the restaurant opened, and everyone looked up from habit. Margaret stood there, but she was barely recognizable. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. She wore simple slacks and a modest blouse, her hair pulled back in a basic ponytail. She looked older, tired, but also somehow more real than she ever had before. The restaurant fell silent. Jasmine was the first to move, approaching Margaret calmly. "Mrs. Whitfield, how can I help you?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, real ones. I came to apologize, properly. Not because the court mandated it, but because I need to. I've been in therapy, intensive therapy, and I'm beginning to understand the damage I've done. Not just to you, but to so many people over the years." She pulled out an envelope and handed it to Jasmine. "This is a letter of apology. My therapist said I should write down everything I wanted to say, but I also wanted to say it in person. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, truly sorry. I was raised with privilege but no compassion, money but no morals, status but no substance. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth I'm finally facing." Jasmine read the letter quickly. It was pages long, detailed, and clearly heartfelt. "Mrs. Whitfield, please call me Margaret. I don't deserve the respect of a title." She looked around the restaurant, seeing her family at their table. "I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. Really trying. I'm volunteering at a community center in a neighborhood I would have never visited before. I'm learning about people I never bothered to see as people, and every day I'm ashamed of who I was." Gloria, who had been sitting at a nearby table with Dr. Patterson for her weekly lunch, a new tradition since her health had improved with proper treatment, stood up slowly and approached. "Margaret," she said quietly, "your mother-in-law, the first Jasmine, once told me something. She said the measure of a person isn't in their falling down, but in their getting up. You fell hard and you fell ugly, but you're trying to get up. That counts for something." Margaret broke down completely then, sobbing in a way that stripped away all pretense. "I don't know how to be different. I don't know how to undo 47 years of being this person. One day at a time," Gloria said simply. "One choice at a time. One act of kindness at a time." Eleanor rose from her table and approached her daughter. "Margaret, you have a long road ahead. But if you're serious about changing, really serious, then you won't walk it alone." Richard remained seated, watching. Emma looked at him questioningly, and he shook his head slightly. "I can't," he said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some things once broken can't be repaired, but I won't stand in the way of her trying to become a better person." Margaret nodded, understanding. "I know. I destroyed our marriage with my own hands. I have to live with that." She turned back to Jasmine. "I know I have no right to ask, but I heard your mother is doing better with treatment. I'm glad. Truly glad. She's on a priority list for a kidney now," Jasmine said carefully. "Mr. Whitfield arranged it. That's good. That's how things should be. People helping people." Margaret wiped her eyes. "I should go. I just needed to say this in person, to look you in the eye and acknowledge what I did." As she turned to leave, Jasmine called out, "Margaret." Margaret stopped, looking back hopefully. "The community center where you're volunteering. My church partners with them for meal services. Maybe I'll see you there sometime." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. A tiny bridge across a vast chasm. Margaret nodded, tears flowing again, and left the restaurant. The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Patterson's phone ringing. He answered quickly, his face changing from professional calm to excited joy. "Gloria, they found a match. A young man in Boston, motorcycle accident, tragic, but he's an organ donor and he's O negative. They want you at the hospital immediately for final testing, but if everything checks out, you could have your transplant by tomorrow." The restaurant erupted in celebration. Jasmine embraced her mother, both of them crying with joy. Richard immediately offered his car and driver. Emma called to cancel her classes to be there for support, and Eleanor began making calls to ensure the best surgeons were available. 6 months later, the Golden Swan hosted a special celebration. Gloria Washington, healthy and vibrant after her successful transplant, sat at the head table with her daughter. Jasmine, now a confident and beloved general manager, had just received her acceptance letter to the final year of nursing school. She'd accelerated her program with the scholarship support. Richard and Emma were there, of course, along with Eleanor. Philippe, thriving in his new role, had brought his family. Dr. Patterson sat with his wife, proud of his patient's recovery. The staff of the Golden Swan, now one of the most sought-after restaurants in the city, known for both its food and its inclusive atmosphere, celebrated together. At a small table in the corner, barely noticed, Margaret sat alone. She'd been invited by Jasmine, a gesture of growing, if cautious, reconciliation. She was different now, quieter, more thoughtful. The divorce had been finalized and she lived modestly in a small apartment, working part-time at a nonprofit that provided legal aid to discrimination victims. It was part of her court-ordered community service that had become a genuine calling. As the evening progressed, Gloria stood to make a toast. The room fell silent, respectful of the woman whose grace had touched them all. "6 months ago, my daughter was humiliated in this very room," Gloria began. "It was one of the worst days of our lives, but it became a turning point. Not just for us, but for everyone here. We learned that standing up to hate takes courage, but it's a courage we all have inside us. We learned that people can surprise you, both in their cruelty and in their kindness. And we learned that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes." She raised her glass of sparkling cider. Alcohol was still off-limits post-transplant. "To second chances, to new beginnings. To the courage to change and the grace to allow others to change. To the original Jasmine Washington, who saved a life and changed a heart 53 years ago, and whose legacy of kindness continues to ripple through time." Everyone raised their glasses, even Margaret in her corner wiping away tears. As the celebration continued, Jasmine found herself standing where it had all happened, where Margaret had torn her dress and changed all their lives. Emma joined her, linking their arms in a gesture that had become natural over the months of their growing friendship. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if that day hadn't happened?" Emma asked. Jasmine considered the question. "My mother might not have gotten her kidney in time. I might still be struggling with multiple jobs. Your father might never have known who your mother really was. You might never have confronted your own prejudices." She paused. "It was horrible, but maybe it needed to happen. My therapist says trauma can be transformative if we let it teach us instead of define us," Emma said. "Your grandmother was right, though. It's not about the falling down. It's about the getting up." Across the room, Margaret watched the two young women, her daughter and the woman she'd tried to destroy, standing together as friends. The loss of her old life still ached, might always ache. But in its place, something new was growing. Not redemption, not yet, maybe never completely, but understanding, empathy, the things that had been missing from her heart for so long. She thought about the original Jasmine Washington, the woman who had saved her life before she was even born. How different might things have been if her mother had told her that story earlier, if she'd known the debt she owed. But that was the past, unchangeable. What mattered now was the future, and the daily choice to be better than she was yesterday. The celebration continued late into the evening, a testament to the strange ways life can twist and turn, breaking things apart only to rebuild them stronger. The Golden Swan had become more than a restaurant. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose courage over comfort, truth over prejudice, and love over hate. As the evening wound down, Jasmine stood to make the final announcement of the night. "I want to thank everyone for being here, for supporting my mother and me through this journey. But I have one more piece of news. The Jasmine Washington Memorial Foundation has just received its largest donation ever, enough to fund 50 nursing scholarships over the next 10 years. Everyone looked around, wondering who the mysterious benefactor was. The donation came with a request for anonymity, Jasmine continued, but also with a message I was asked to read. In memory of a woman who saved lives before they were lost, and in hope that her legacy of compassion will continue through generations. May we all learn to see each other as she saw us, simply as human beings deserving of kindness." Margaret slipped out quietly during the applause, unnoticed by all except Jasmine, who watched her go with a small, understanding nod. She'd sold everything she had left, jewelry, designer goods, anything of value from her old life, to make that donation. It was her way of trying to balance the scales, even knowing they could never truly be balanced. Outside, Margaret stood on the sidewalk, looking back at the Golden Swan one last time. Through the windows she could see the warm light, the celebrating people, the life she'd once been part of and had destroyed with her own hands. But also perhaps the beginning of something new. Not a return to what was. That was impossible. But maybe, just maybe, a path toward who she could still become. As she walked away into the night, Margaret thought she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, the lightness that comes from finally, truly, starting to do the right thing. It would be a long journey, perhaps a lifetime's work. But for the first time she was ready to begin. Inside the Golden Swan, the celebration continued, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed divided beyond repair. But here, in this place where the worst of humanity had been displayed, the best had ultimately triumphed. Not through revenge or hatred, but through the harder path of justice tempered with mercy, consequences paired with opportunity, and the radical act of allowing people the chance to change. The story of the torn dress would be told for years to come, but not as a tale of shame, rather as a reminder that sometimes it takes a moment of darkness to reveal the light, and that even the smallest acts of courage can change lives in ways we never imagine. And in a hospital across town, the healthy kidney of a young man who'd never known any of them was already beginning to save Gloria Washington's life, proving once again that we are all connected in ways we may never fully understand, but must never forget to honor. This story moved you, didn't it? When Margaret tore that dress, she exposed an ugly truth that still exists today. But Jasmine's dignity proved that hatred cannot destroy the human spirit. What would you have done in that restaurant? Would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Comment your answer below. It matters. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that standing up to injustice changes lives, that people can change, that the worst moments can become turning points. Subscribe for more powerful true stories like If You Believe in Justice and Second Chances. Share because someone needs this message today. Remember, we choose every day to either tear others down or lift them up. Which will you choose today?